important story, and thank you, Tings, for sharing it with us. Next, we will be hearing from Tzazna Miranda Leal, who is an organizer with Justicia for Migrant Workers and the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, based in Toronto. Ms. Miranda Leal is a community-based activist originally from Mexico. Is everything okay?
We're giggling about Ms.
Oh, okay. I'm just reading. Just reading what I was given. Is a community-based activist originally from Mexico. For the past eight years, she's been organizing with Justice for Migrant Workers, working with migrant farm and food workers from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, the Caribbean, Philippines, and Thailand. In 2010, Tzazna coordinated the organizing of the Pilgrimage to Freedom, a historic 52-kilometer, 12-hour migrant worker march for justice. In the past years, Tzazna has been involved in numerous workplace and community organizing efforts across Ontario. She has also worked alongside the Caregivers Action Center to support migrant living caregivers in their organizing and building of campaigns. Additionally, she worked as a community organizer in Parkdale Community Legal Clinic in Toronto from 2012 to 2014, where she supported Parkdale immigrant and refugee residents to resist the most recent changes to the immigration system. While at Parkdale Community Legal Services, she was also involved in the successful Sanctuary City campaign at Toronto City Hall, a campaign to open up access to municipal services to undocumented residents of the city. So please join me in inviting Tzazna up to the mic, and she will be talking to us about migrant worker and migrant sex workers justice.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, good evening. Sorry I rushed into the panel. We were in Ottawa and we just got back from some horrifying soul-killing work in the capital. With those who I dare not name. But yeah, so my name is Tzazna, and I'm sorry that was such a long bio. I thought we were going to put it down, but I was like, oh God, just cut it. I'm going to try to speak quickly because I know we have a lot of amazing people that are going to be talking. And yeah, so basically I've been working with migrant workers, mostly in farm work, but also in the last few years, caregivers, construction workers, landscapers. But most of my work has been with farm workers, some of which are women that are coming into Canada with temporary permits from Mexico, the Caribbean, Thailand, the Philippines. Really now, you name it, right? Folks that are growing our food are from all over the world. And actually, several of the women that we've worked with and met over the years also do sex work, which we didn't find at the beginning. I guess it wasn't something that we assumed was happening, but obviously as we started getting to know people on the ground, we realized that that was our reality, right? That farm workers mostly make minimum wage, so some mostly single mothers were engaging in sex work to be able to sustain their families back home. And so that's when we really realized that we needed to start learning about these issues together and not as things that seemingly were separate, right? And over the last few years, we've also been seeing the growth of this human trafficking work, which I know you've discussed today and in some recent panels, especially when you were on one. But we find, so we've been seeing the federal government essentially fund the hell out of human trafficking work, right? And by virtue of providing funding for it, they're essentially making NGOs and agencies all across Canada all of a sudden come together on this issue. And it's increasingly obvious that that this work funded by the federal government focuses on sex work over other types of work, but specifically law enforcement and criminalizing of sex work. It's very specifically anti-sex work. And they sort of drop the other types of human trafficking that, as they define it, I think in an issue to really just seem like they're doing other work, but really we know it's targeting sex workers, mostly women, migrant women. And according to the human trafficking list,
workers and farm workers, men as well.
I'm sorry?
And construction workers and farm workers men as well.
That's right. So according to the human trafficking discourse, labor exploitation is another type of human trafficking, right? And so I'm here today to talk about sort of the labor piece and our experience with this human trafficking work. And so between 2006, which is when Citizenship and Immigration started giving out temporary resident visa to victims of human trafficking, and 2011, around 73 people got these temporary resident permits because the government agreed with them that they were victims of human trafficking. And more than half of those people were migrant workers, were people that came into Canada from Thailand and Mexico in the temporary foreign worker program. So more and more we see also the discourse around labor exploitation being framed under human trafficking, as opposed to as a labor rights issue or a human rights issue, a health and safety rights issue, right? And again, it's because the money's that the government is throwing at agencies has also shifted the work that many organizations do. And so even though labor exploitation seems like a fair enough or like a simple enough concept, for us it is similarly problematic or can turn into something similarly problematic as what has been discussed regarding sex work. Because we see the government taking a criminalizing approach to labor. And we see the government using a similar moralistic and paternalistic framework with temporary foreign workers as they do with women engaging in sex work. Temporary foreign workers in other industries, right, that they've gotten permits for, in agriculture, in caregiving. And so, yeah, we see labor exploitation as a concept within the context of human trafficking, being also used to further criminalize other migrants in low-wage occupations such as farm work and folks that are generally precarious in status, right? And we see agencies and NGOs being forced to collaborate with immigration enforcement, or maybe not forced, but coerced into this collaboration with enforcement in order to protect workers, right? And so what the issue is that protection of workers is being moved from civil authorities to criminal authorities, right? And this is something that I think has already been echoed by other speakers, but we definitely find that an issue in other areas of work. And as I said, did anybody hear about the 404 rule? Yeah, so the government of Canada said, oh no, temporary foreign workers are being exploited. Why don't we fix it by not letting them come back? Right? So they're going to be able to come here for 4 years, but then we're going to kick them out so that we don't exploit them. And then they can come back after 4 years when they're ready for some more exploitation, but then we'll defend them again by kicking them out for another 4 years, right? And so these sort of paternalistic attitudes are the same things that are being used when the so-called, what they used to call the stripper visa, right, or the entertainment visa for women that were doing dancing in Canada. When they eliminated that visa, they also said that was to protect women, right? When they added into work permits and study permits the little caveat that said you cannot engage in sex work or go close to the industries where sex work is happening. So you can't even be, a teller in a sex shop where, on the top floor there's some sex work maybe happening, maybe not, who knows, but you can't do it. They also said that was to protect us, right? And so it's essentially closing down the pathways, right? Closing down the programs, which really only pushes people into more precarious situations, right? Because people will continue to work to support their families, will continue to do sex work, and will continue to also work here undocumented if that means that they can continue to feed their families, right? I don't have to tell you, right, what happens to people when they're pushed into more precarious situations. We'll put up with different situations at work that we wouldn't otherwise would have, right? If we had a work permit, if we were able to change employers, right? So I'm conscious of my time. It's interesting that the government is putting up all of these, actually throwing all of this money into protecting workers and putting all these sort of knee-jerk reaction policies to protect workers, like the 404 rule, like eliminating the dancer visa and like prohibiting sex work in our work permits, when they really could be doing a lot more. And we've been proposing ways of protecting people with precarious immigration status for years now, right? And are any of those issues being addressed? You want to protect workers? How about banning all recruitment fees across Canada so that a worker does not have to pay $15,000 to come to Canada to work in a minimum wage job? What do you think happens when you owe your entire house back home to be here? You're not gonna take up a fight at work, right? Because what happens to people that are in the temporary foreign worker program in low wage occupations is they have a tied work permit to one employer. So you get deported essentially once your employer decides they don't need you anymore, right? So if the federal government really wanted to protect workers, they would be putting money into proactive labor enforcement, right? They would be extending immigration, not limiting the ways in which people come to Canada. They would be extending status to people, right? Because that is the single largest barrier to access to rights for people in the temporary foreign worker program. Open work permits, the ability to switch employers. This is nothing out of this world, right? We don't like our employer, we change it, except when you're in these programs, you can't. Your permit is tied to one person, right? I'm sorry, okay. Yeah, so I was actually looking at these things on Facebook on the train back, the demands and the stuff that has been worked on today, and I was really happy to see that one of the demands was to defund human trafficking work, anti-human trafficking work federally, and to put that money towards real community enforcement. And if the government wanted to defend workers' rights, they would put that into proactive labor enforcement, right? They would put that into human rights enforcement across Canada, into banning fees, into providing status for everyone who is in Canada and is coming to Canada. So that's what we want to see happen, and we don't want to see further victimization of people, right? And this human trafficking discourse with the one group of workers that we did work with that actually got TRP visas and were accepted by Canada as human trafficking victims from a farm in Ontario. Those women went through horrible things at their job, but they were not victims. Those women were strong as, tough as nails women, leaders of their families, who continued to support their families despite what was happening. And so the context and the discourse of human trafficking, the structures being set up, do not work for people that are actually facing labor issues, labor exploitation. So, I think I'll just leave it at that. It doesn't work. And I agree that we need to be moving into the enforcement of rights and not into human trafficking for sex work or for other types of work that migrants are engaging in.